Welcome to the Ann Arbor Human Rights Commission, our April meeting. We're going to start with Jonathan calling roll, making sure that we have a quorum. Jonathan.
Commissioner Stambaugh.
Here.
Commissioner Winkler.
Here.
Commissioner Meadows.
Here.
Commissioner Cohen. Absent. Commissioner Garber. Absent. Commissioner Bond.
Here.
Councilmember Ghazi Edwin.
Here.
Commissioner Hernandez Jackson. Absent. Councilmember Watson.
He's on his way.
Commissioner Noel.
Present.
And Commissioner Lane.
Here.
And Commissioner Cohen is coming.
Okay, thank you.
The agenda. Let me just explain to you what I'm trying to do with the agenda, which keeps changing minute by minute. We now have the third entry on the agenda is now 2 issues and their impact in Ann Arbor. And what we're going to do is finish both of those and take as much time as they need. I'm assuming we're talking about an hour, but I'm not sure. But that kind of time. And then we will go back to our old business, our regular business.
I want to confirm no public comment sign-ups.
No public comment. Okay. So that we can begin now with the first, who wants to go first of the 2 issues?
Okay.
And let me just let you know that this is the School of Social Work, huh?
Do you want me to introduce?
You can introduce, yes.
Yep. So these, go ahead up there. Get on up there.
I'm gonna.
So they are I'll let you guys introduce yourselves by name, but these are students from a University of Michigan School of Social Work graduate class. And they explored various equity issues that are occurring in the city and gave recommendations. And they did a really great job. And obviously this is an issue that we have been trying to get a grasp of. Mm-hmm. So, do you guys want to introduce yourselves?
Hi, I'm Claire Hamming. I am starting school social work officially in fall 2025, but I've been taking some classes while also an undergrad here at Michigan.
I'm Charlotte. I'm a senior. I'm also taking grad classes, but I'm in the 4+1, so kind of halfway in the grad program, kind of not, but otherwise majoring in psychology and social work.
I'm Sydney Heed. I'm also overlapping undergrad and graduate studies. My undergrad is actually in drama with a primary interest in applied theater and a minor in community action and social change. And then I'll be getting a master's in social work.
Good. And your topic is?
Unarmed crisis response.
Unarmed crisis response.
We're having some technical difficulties, just one second.
Okay, that's the simplest. Right.
Yeah, I was thinking so too. Yeah.
What do they say? Mercury's in Gatorade? Okay, there we go. We've made some progress. As Claire said, we're going to be talking to you a little bit today about the status of unarmed crisis response in Ann Arbor. You can go ahead and advance. So just for some very brief history, in 2021, the City of Ann Arbor passed a proposal basically to direct the city government to create an unarmed crisis response team in Ann Arbor, which would basically mean a team that would respond to certain calls, like for instance, mental health crisis or calls involving unhoused people instead of the police. This is something that has been enacted in a lot of other cities across the country. An RFP was released to find a team that could put this together for us. And a team called Coalition for Re-envisioning Our Safety, abbreviated CROWS, submitted to that RFP. A branch of their team, now known as Care-Based Safety, was going to be kind of the feet on the ground for that. And that proposal was denied. There were some concerns about values not aligning. I think there were some logistical concerns. There were supposedly some concerns raised about liability. We don't know what they were. And that's where it gets really dicey. It was very, very hard to actually piece together what had happened since then because there just wasn't a whole lot of information publicly available. So as best we have been able to piece it together, a second modified RFP, which with a much narrower scope, was released, I believe, in 2024. Care-Based Safety had some community meetings to determine if they wanted to apply for that RFP, decided not to. They believed it did not align with their mission. And so nobody responded to that RFP, I think in large part because maybe there were some perceptions that the scope was just too limited. And you can read that RFP on the city's website. There's also an addendum that's about 7 pages that seems to answer some questions about the limited scope. That was an interesting read. But the big takeaway here is just that there's been a lack of transparency, and we just kind of ultimately don't know where things are right now. We know that the city administrator and possibly some others, like the chief of police, are traveling the country looking at models in other cities. We know that funds have been reallocated to various other programs within the city government, but it's a really murky puzzle right now. You can advance. Oh, thank you. So just to kind of paint a picture of why this issue is so important. We know by now that certain identities are at an increased risk of experiencing use of force by the police. And just to put in perspective how great the discrepancy is, according to NIH, Black and Hispanic people are 50% more likely to experience use of force. And according to NAMI, those with mental illness are 10 times more likely to experience use of force. So that's a pretty massive difference. There's also a lot of historical mistrust of police due to a long history of state violence, which can lead to folks who need help not seeking that help because they don't feel safe. So it leads to people suffering in silence, not seeking resources that could be beneficial to them or even important for their safety. It's also important to note, especially when we're talking about, professions like social work, that oppression, marginalization can also occur through surveillance and soft policing, right? So an example of soft policing would be, for instance, requiring drug tests for welfare benefits. It's things that bring people more into contact with the system, increase the risk of criminalization for small issues, and just overall lead to them being watched more, which often, again, has discrepancies based on identities. And this kind of contact can create a domino effect that locks people in the system. If you get picked up for a small offense, you can lose your job, you can lose your house, you can lose your family, and those are all causal factors of crime. You can advance. So I do want to take a moment to note Ora Rosser, who was killed actually here 10 years ago in Ann Arbor by AAPD. She was in the midst of a mental health crisis, and that did inspire protests, and it did inspire reforms. I, of course, also want to remember Ryan Gaynor, who was killed recently. He was 15 years old. But something actually occurred just since we last gave this presentation yesterday morning. And near Salt Lake City, a 17-year-old child named Victor Perez was shot by police in the midst of a mental health crisis. And he is in the hospital in critical condition right now, and he had to have a leg amputated. And he had both mental and physical disabilities, and he was, it sounds like, mostly or completely nonverbal. So this is not something that happens occasionally. This is something that happens all the time and is likely underreported because not everybody who has a mental health illness has a diagnosis. Mm-hmm. So we need to just understand the full scale of the issue. Go ahead and advance.
Yeah, so we've spoken to quite a few stakeholders, community members throughout our project and the research we've been doing. So we're showing them up here. We're not gonna go through all of them just because that would take quite a bit. But for example, we talk to people at organizations like Care-Based Safety and Detroit Safety Team that are working to do unarmed crisis response in areas very close to Ann Arbor, but not quite Ann Arbor. We talk to people within the policing system, and we talk to people who were within CROWS, which was that original body of unarmed crisis response. You can go ahead. So Care-Based Safety specifically, they're an organization that's working towards, as I said, unarmed crisis response. And originally they wanted to do it throughout the entirety of Washtenaw County, but because of Ann Arbor's RFPs and the strict regulations that came with it, they didn't feel that they were able to do the work within Ann Arbor, so they have primarily only boxed their work in Ypsilanti right now, which they're happy to do, and they're putting all their time into Ypsi's community. However, they would in future like to extend to all of Washtenaw County. So like I kind of covered, but along with that goal of expanding through Washtenaw County, they also would like to have their own dispatch separate from 911. They feel that being a part of 911 still is putting that policing system into their unarmed crisis response, and thus you can't fully be separate from police showing up to a scene that occurs, such as like mental health crises. Additionally, a big thing that we really were drawn with Care-Based Safety was the fact that they include the community in every step of their process. They have community meetings quite often, and they only make organizational calls with community members' input. So with the second RFP that was decided, like Sydney talked about, because the community unanimously decided they did not want to apply based on the parameters. And then lastly, with Care-Based Safety, they very much emphasize this consent-based responses, which Sydney's really well spoken on, so I'm going to let her kind of talk about that part.
Yeah, in essence, that is a disability justice issue. So there is a long history of folks with disabilities, be they mental or physical, being denied agency and autonomy over their bodies. And this comes into play in crisis situations because not only does being arrested by the police involve a concrete loss of physical freedom, but so does something like an involuntary commitment for a mental health crisis. And there's actually been activism in disabled communities against measures like that. So the takeaway here is that as we're talking about, establishing community responses that are separate from police, we need to be mindful that we are not just introducing more coercive measures to communities that do not uplift their autonomy and their full humanity. So we just need to be mindful of that.
Now we're going to talk a little bit about potential forces for and against change. So our forces for change, Care-Based Safety, as we've mentioned, is really great about bringing the community together and getting input from everyone. We also have previous proposals that have been planned by CROWS. So there's a lot of ideas that we already have, and why start from scratch when there are so many great people that have already put their time and effort into this. There's also many partner organizations that Care-Based Safety has behind them. And then the Washtenaw County Sheriff and Ann Arbor Police Chief, both of whom we spoke with while gathering information for this project, are pushing for a non-co-response model. We're going to be talking further of what this non-co-response model looks like, as well as what it is. And then we, along with organizations like Care-Based Safety, are working to make this cause visible, despite some resistance and really not having full transparency in some situations. And we've also met with many people within the city government, and we're presenting to you all at this time. So, and then for forces against change, it's difficult to work with administration that believe a co-response model is desirable. Again, we're going to touch on that in a couple slides. Another point is that reformist ideas without action and administration are very harmful. Care-Based Safety talked to us about this and how they've found that some community members will get really excited about someone that is, a public figure that's saying, yes, I want to make XYZ change. And they say this, but there's no action behind it. And it makes it really difficult for them to really show community members, like, yes, people are saying these words, but again, we want to see this action behind it. So it's something that can really be against change with these reformist ideas without action. And then also a lack of understanding of harms from policing. People are conditioned to call the police for many issues. And we spoke to many officers as well as the police chief and Washtenaw County Sheriff, and they talked about how they do get so many calls that they feel like they either don't have the ability to really handle these situations, especially like mental health crises. So they would really appreciate having this unarmed crisis response also. And then we talked about it a little bit previously, but having a lack of transparency within the RFP process, as well as questioning what's going on in regards to the kind of research that's going on around unarmed crisis models, especially with like what the city administrator is doing at this time. We would really love to hear that, and we've heard from many community members that they would love to know what sort of research has been going on the past 3 or 4 years by him. And then also miscommunication or very little communication between stakeholders is something that we noticed while talking to many different stakeholders from different point of views. And so, yeah, those are some of our courses. The next slide.
So our intervention, the idea that we're landing on is that we think that either Care-Based Safety or an organization that's doing similar work specifically in Ann Arbor needs to be given funding, specifically by either the Ann Arbor Police budget or the Washtenaw Sheriff's budget. We believe that this funding needs to come without any oversight or surveillance, as well as without any restrictions that go against their mission, as well as complete transparency. These are things that Care-Based Safety has been very loud about missing with the RFPs before, and that they kind of don't really want to get into funding that doesn't involve those 3 parameters, if that makes sense. And then lastly, they should have access to a separate line from 911. But even if that is not the case, at least at first, we know that's a huge step. So at least asking that 911 operators be trained to know when and how to divert calls would be a good first step, because they're very big on knowing that change is not fast and not immediate. So that is a way that we think the intervention can be done faster. Additionally, stationing social workers specifically, if training those operators is going to take a while, which training normally takes a while. So social workers would be an ideal person to have stationed there in the beginning. So co-response as a whole is involving sending police and social workers together to a 911 dispatch call, whether it be mental health crisis or what have you. Historically and both modern times, police violence often means that community members just do not trust the co-response model. A lot of community members have a very valid distrust with the policing system and cops in general, so putting cops and social workers together not only creates a distrust in the cops, but it also creates a very valid distrust in the social workers with them. It also just doesn't eliminate the disproportionate risk of force, because the cops with the ability to use force are still there, and they are still showing up in their uniforms and with their weapons. So we think we know that it'll still arouse nervous system activation, and it has the potential to escalate the situation, whether that's the plan or not. And then lastly, it's just posing that ethical question for social workers, and like I said, the potential to erode trust within the social work system, which sometimes that trust is a little questionable anyways, but we'd like to not push that. So overall, looking with the Marshall Project, they do a lot of work with unarmed crisis response. They believe that unarmed responders rarely need to call for police, with several programs citing a statistic of only 1% call for backup. So the rates are really low in terms of the argument of needing cops with weapons at these calls. So takeaway, co-response is just not truly unarmed. We have heard many times, like in different ways, we've heard co-response of, cops can show up in plain clothes. They can do it, it's not truly unarmed. There will always be weapons, and there will always be mistrust, both with the social workers and the cops involved. So some examples of non-co-response models. We found a document online where a group done years of research, and they found up to 116 unarmed crisis response models across the nation. A caveat is that they are mostly separate. A lot of them do still have to use 911 dispatch because they are still in their first few years of being developed. So though they're not completely separate in that way, their calls are routed through 911. The police are never dispatched on the calls, for the most part, from the research they did. They are entirely crisis response teams who are being dispatched rather than any cops. So those are just a couple examples. We did reach out to a few of them. Unfortunately, none of them were able to meet with us before this, but yes, they are there and they do answer. Just not as quickly as we would hope sometimes.
And then we mentioned previously wanting some law enforcement funds to be reallocated towards community services for example, care-based safety or similar programs. So I'm going to touch on that a little bit within this slide. Reallocating a law enforcement budget is giving money to the community-based organizations, allowing them to restore social services so that law enforcement is not working out of its scope. We heard from many people within law enforcement that they feel currently that they are working with outside of their scope, especially when it comes to these mental health crises. These are quite a few examples here, and then similarly to the research that Charlotte did, I also found another study down here that's takes a bunch of them. I don't have the exact number of how many were on there, but this is just like a drop in the bucket for all of the examples they had of law enforcement budgets that were being reallocated in different cities. So just to touch on a few, in Oakland, California, June 2021, they redirected $18 million proposed for police spending from the mayor's budget to alternative methods of violence prevention. $4 million invested into MACRO, which was a mobile assistance community response program. That is one we tried reaching out to, yes. I believe.
Yes. They did answer. They did
answer, yes. But again, quick turnaround. And then another example is in New York City. In July 2020, NYC Council shifted roughly $1 billion from the New York Police Department budget to mental health, homelessness, and education services. So again, there's many, many examples. There's more within this also. So some consequences to our approach. Creating political will to enact unarmed crisis response can lead to watered down approaches, which can bring about soft and hard policing, thus putting more people at risk. So this is something that we recognize and that we want to be very aware of. And then also, care-based safety is focused on the Ypsilanti area alone at this point. This is something Charlotte touched on earlier. They feel in the sense that they were sort of forced out of Ann Arbor because of the RFP not going through. So as of now, they've spent quite a while really building community in Ypsilanti. And for now, they're going to continue working there. So as of now, it seems as if Ann Arbor will have to find another organization or body of people who'd be willing to develop a non-co-response unarmed crisis response program in Ann Arbor.
So just to kind of reiterate a few points and tie everything up, we want to emphasize that co-response is not unarmed in the sense that there are still armed officers in the room, and even if the intentions are pure, even if everybody is genuinely putting their training to the best use possible and wants a good outcome, there is just simply activation that happens in the nervous system when there's a weapon present, and that can lead to escalation even under the best of circumstances. Especially if the situation is already charged and somebody already is in crisis and does not have their needs met. We also want to emphasize that the community has made their desires clear through numerous meetings with care-based safety. So there are community voices included throughout this process, and we're really grateful to care-based safety for kind of doing that footwork, because this ensures that we're not purely thinking about it from an academic standpoint, we're thinking about it from a human standpoint. We also want to point out a few issues again in regard to disability justice here. Anytime you send police and somebody instead of somebody who is trained to deal with a mental health crisis, you're essentially denying that person resources that could actually help them. You're denying them needed care, right? Because again, even if police approach this with good intentions, it's just simply not their training, right? It's a question of scope. So, you're denying basically people with disabilities care that could actually help them, ideally consent-based care. We also want to point out that there was a DC lawsuit that alleged that sending police to mental health emergencies discriminated against people with disabilities for that reason. We don't know the outcome of that lawsuit yet, but it could be a civil rights violation. We also just want to kind of re-emphasize that our recommended intervention is essentially that care-based safety has done the work, they figured out how this should work, and they care very deeply about this issue. So we believe that giving them the resources to succeed is the best course of action. And again, because right now they're needing to concentrate their work in IPSI, if that is not possible, to find a group doing similar work in Ann Arbor. We do not believe that co-response is going to be the safest or most care-based approach for those involved. And we also want to point out that any funding that would be allocated would need to come with reasonable requirements for oversight, things that did not increase soft policing, things that did not, were not impossible for the organization to meet. So there would need to be dialogue there with the organization's voice taken into account. And again, they should have their own phone line if they wish. There are people who will not call 911 because they don't feel safe. So that alternative line may lead to more people reaching out for resources. But because so many people do call 911, we believe that operators should be trained on when to divert as well to maximize use of this kind of program and increase safety. So.
Thank you. Questions?
Yeah.
Yes, thank you very much. Don't sit down. Questions?
First of all, thanks. That was great. How's it going in Ipsy? And did the city? Where is their funding coming from? How is the dispatching working? Are people requesting unarmed response, or is the dispatcher deciding? And are there some times when they actually do need the police too? Who makes that decision? Do you know? I mean, you may not.
To break into the first part, we can answer the first part for sure.
Yeah, because they're still getting off the ground in Ipsy. So they're separate from any municipal government right now.
Oh.
They're operating in Ipsy, but not necessarily with funding from the city of Ypsilanti's government. So they are completely independent at this point.
They have private donors and
Yeah,
They're
private
focused on
partners.
private donors.
So how do people reach them if they need them?
They do a lot of on the ground work. Like they are on the street. They do shifts as of now, and they have members in the community.
They're also focused on training community members themselves. That was a similarity between Detroit and Ipsy, is they're doing workshops for community members so that if for some reason the people who are empowered in the organization are not available or are not out, community members can step in and help their own neighborhood without needing the intervention of the organization. So.
Yeah.
Like
And it-
de-escalation kinds of things?
Yes.
Exactly. Yep.
Mediation, yeah.
And again, just to emphasize that they're still in ramp up, right? Because
Yep.
this has all
Very
just happened
beginning.
within the last couple of years. So they're kind of step by step introducing different aspects of their approach. And they do have some information about that on their website as well.
Thank you.
And again, touching on budget and money and things, it's difficult to provide some of these services when they only have so many people working because they don't have a budget to pay the people that they need. Yes.
Do you have any idea how many people they've serviced over a year?
I don't know if they
That's
have
numbers
those
we could
stats.
ask though
Yeah.
and see if we can get numbers and get them to you.
Yep.
Yeah, we can definitely reach out and ask about that.
Yeah. They knew we were presenting tonight, so I'm sure they're happy to answer anything.
I don't know if you guys touched on this or if you have information on it, but I was curious if any of the programs you guys read about had a separate line already, and if they do, I'm kind of curious, is there a public campaign that goes with the separate line? Because I could imagine that a lot of calls would still probably go to 911, even if there was a separate, so I'm just kind of curious about that.
Yeah. I mean, you have the new 988 suicide prevention line that's been pushed out more recently. And so I guess that's more of a national sort of line. But I could see something where they're giving responding calls to the area, the local unarmed crisis response. Do you want to continue on that?
Well, yeah, because just to give an example, in terms of a line connected to a specific team, I'm not 100% sure, but somebody correct me if you can remember. But I do know that there are instances of warm lines that are separate even from 988 because it's, again, sometimes there's just a community trust issue with lines like that. One example that's actually in Detroit, I believe, it has a 313 area code anyway, is the Thrive Lifeline. So that's, again, another consent-based lifeline where they basically will not take crisis action without your consent. It's geared towards those with marginalized identities. And I do know that they have quite a bit of information available online, including other, they would call them non-carceral resources. But I do not know what their initial campaign looked like. But that would be an example to look into, and it's relatively local.
Thank you.
Other questions?
Right now, if I were to call and let the responders know that I do not want a weapon in my home, would I be denied? care, or would my relative be denied care? What would happen?
That's a great question.
By a police officer? Have you requested?
Yeah, if I called and my brother was having some sort of a, episode.
So one thing I can tell you is I've spoke with many police officers who asked to not be named, and I had one, for instance, tell me that he didn't feel comfortable going into a home where someone was having a mental health crisis without his weapon.
Wow.
And I don't mean to interrupt.
No, go ahead.
In terms of care-based safety, their people don't carry weapons, right? So again, we're talking about a service that is not in its fullest expression yet, but if you use this service and if they determined that this was something that they had the resources to respond to, these are not people who would be coming with guns, because that's just not the kind of service that they are.
Okay.
Other questions?
Couple of questions. What is your ultimate objective for getting funding? Are you pursuing it with the police departments or other entities separate from, so that you have the funding to ideally implement this fully? And if you don't get it, then what would be your next step?
I mean, I can speak to the part of like if funding is not got, which is that they will continue the work they're doing. They've been doing it just fine on their own with the private donors they have now. And when we talk to them, they very much express that they don't necessarily need this funding and they're perfectly fine without it. And I think they're so strong on being separate from any municipal government that they would rather stick with the donor base they have because it is reliable, realistically, compared to government funding, especially with where we're at now with the administration. So honestly, on that side of things, when we talk to them, they're very much like, yeah, that'd be helpful, that'd be great to like expedite our cause a little more, but we don't need it. We would love it because we'd like to expedite it in Ann Arbor, but they're doing great work in Ipsy as is, and they simply don't need the funding in order to continue. So.
Yeah, and just to emphasize again that when we talk about reallocation of funds, we're talking about a reallocation, not necessarily like a budget that the police department would have oversight of, just to avoid conflicts of interest again, or any infringement on mission or scope.
Yeah, well, first, great presentation. Really appreciate you all for coming out. I think thinking about this as well from a, continuum of care perspective, I was curious if you found any or had any insight on prevention efforts as well too. So how do we get to a point where we aren't relying on the response part or the reactive part? So I wasn't sure if that was, if you had any information on that, and then also if you have any thoughts on what are additional groups that need to be involved in this work. So in thinking about this, I guess the way I'm envisioning it is very kind of short-term, acute situations, but for people, especially with mental health challenges, how do we get them to that long-term care to prevent just like a cycle or repeated behavior or experiences as well. So just curious, like if you have any thoughts on if there's other local clinics or other professionals or whatever else that need to be involved to make this as holistic as possible.
I really appreciate your question about prevention, because like as a social worker, that is 100% what I will do forever in my life, is try to focus on prevention efforts. And I think that is what care-based safety is already doing. They're very community-based, which having community and like saying like we are here and we have these community meetings is like a big key point in starting prevention for that community. And then also, do you want to add anything about what they've been doing? They have the community care circles.
They've also been working on skill building within the community. I know I kind of touched on that earlier, but the fact that I've heard it from both the Detroit Safety Team and from Care-Based Safety, the fact that their focus is on making sure that community members can take care of themselves so that they're out of a job. That was a direct quote I got, which was magical. But like their whole purpose is that we want to give you the skills as a community to do this for one another in your neighborhoods, so that we don't have to be here forever and you don't have to call us, because you all know each other, you can depend on each other. So there's that prevention.
Do you know what that entails? Like the community training? Like is there a specific curriculum, or did they co-create it with the community? Or
To my knowledge, it's definitely co-created. They come with their social work background to build the skill set foundation of like this is going to be on de-escalation, this is going to be on mediation, that kind of thing. But otherwise, it's very much built around community members in terms of when do they want to have it, how often, and they're kind of every year adjusting based on what the community is telling them.
Yeah, and to add on to that, Care-Based Safety is actually hosting a few workshops right now. So there's one this Sunday on de-escalation. To my knowledge, it's free. So resources like that help us to kind of de-escalate situations ourselves so that they don't become so heated, so that, again, maybe you don't need these services to begin with. I'll also just emphasize, back when I did some more journalism stuff than I do now, I wrote an article about some mental health stuff, and one thing that was very much emphasized to me, especially when we are talking about mental health care from a disability justice standpoint, is that a lot of prevention is access to resources and it is building community. And I bring that up because they talk about community care circles, and I just took a restorative justice training with Dispute Resolution Center. So those are, indigenous restorative practices that are rooted around community building so that they are proactive instead of just reactive, responding to a problem or harm that occurred. So it comes down to community building and just simple access to resources. Like if you give people housing, if you give them easy access to medical care, a lot of other things get better.
Other questions? I have some. First of all, is there any statistics on what they're doing in Ypsilanti? Do we have any idea how many people they've serviced altogether, for example?
I imagine there's an annual report that they would put out.
I don't know.
You're talking about care-based safety.
You talking about care-based safety?
Huh?
You were talking about care-based safety?
Yes.
Yeah, there's probably an annual report they put out.
They do have end-of-year reports on their website.
Yeah.
I was
Okay.
looking yesterday, and they definitely have them. They're just pages and pages long, and I didn't look at stats. I didn't see they were there.
I was also curious about the 116 other installations of things that are not co-response, or most of them are not co-response, and whether there is any, so far I have not heard that there has been any incident where somebody was hurt or things.
Nope.
I mean, you would hear about it, right? You would hear about it on the
You
news.
think so?
And you can check us at that link to the Marshall Project, because that's what that whole article was about, but
Thank you.
I'm pretty sure it said that there had not been any major incidents.
Okay, can I ask a question? So of those 116, do you ever see any that have the fiscal structure that you guys are recommending? Where they're an entity that also gets county or city money, but they're disconnected? Because I think, one thing that Mayor Taylor said when he came to the presentation and saw you guys was when there's taxpayer dollars involved, then there's all these other legal things that get triggered. Or maybe there's a way that, it happens separately as a social, I don't know. But I'm wondering, in the examples you looked up, did you see that happening?
The one overlap that I recall, and there could be hundreds more potentially, but the macro one, if you go back to the slide, I can tell you the exact number. One more or two more. The budget. Yes, thank you. So they invested $4 million into them from budget, and they are separate from the police. However, I want to say they do work with.
They're working with the fire department and
yes.
EMTs, so they do have that connection. That's who I was reaching out to. Like the chief of the fire department is in charge of leading that program. So unfortunately, we didn't get to speak to them because I was really curious about how that kind of looked, considering we were pushing this separation from the government. So unfortunately, we did not get a chance before this presentation to figure out how that looked. But that is part of it for at least that program specifically. I don't want to talk on the other ones.
I would maybe look at REC, because that program was cited many, many times as something of an ideal to work toward, I guess, at least in some aspects, if not all. And we did contact them, again, just, we were on a deadline and there's only so many interviews you can do in a finite amount of time. But they may be a good resource to speak further with.
Reps in Minnesota.
REP?
Yeah. REP.
Oh, REP.
They're in Minnesota.
Yeah.
Okay.
And I think they're kind of the closest to what care-based safety is trying to be. So.
Anything else? Well, thank you very, very
Great.
much. Are you going to stick around for the next presentation, or are you going to leave? Okay. Because we might talk afterwards about, I don't know. Huh?
It'll be something interesting.
It sure will be. Okay.
Okay. Hello, everybody. I'm Sophie. I am also in the 4+1 program at Michigan. I'm studying sociology and BCN, and then I'll be starting full-time social work in the fall. And this project is on food insecurity in Washtenaw County, which I'm sure most of us know has become an increasing issue as of lately because of funding that has been cut from programs and federally to food locally. So to get into it, I just wanted to start by prefacing that this kind of whole presentation is based off the premise that we believe food is just a basic human right and should be provided regardless of status or orientation or employment. And as I'm sure you know, a lot of the EBT or programs that are federally funded require work or proof of employment, and that can be a barrier for a lot of people. So just to start with some logistics, I got these from MIT Living Wage and Feeding America. But obviously, the cost of meals is just continually increasing. And overall, we've seen a decrease in the number of people in Washtenaw County who are food insecure. However, we have seen an uptick in children, which is notable. I don't have the most recent stats from 2025, but that would be something to look into. And I'm curious to see, as we move forward, we could expect that these numbers would increase even more. And then also, as I'm sure you're aware, living in Ann Arbor is extremely expensive. And as Aisha talks about in class, there's such a wealth disparity here that a lot of the poverty in Ann Arbor is invisible or hidden. So that causes a big gap in terms of who gets help and who gets resources in Ann Arbor. So as you can see, it's extremely expensive, costs are only going up, and we can expect that more people are going to become food insecure. So we spoke with Derek Miller, who is the executive director at CAN, and he was talking to us about their approach and how they use economies of scale. And economies of scale are great if you're trying to use your money in the best way, which they obviously are. However, when funding is cut, it has a huge impact, and it has had a huge impact on CAN. He was talking about how since funding has been cut, they've had to fire people, and they've had to scale back on programs, and this has just caused overall such a huge effect that is far greater than the number of dollars that they're missing out on. So essentially, programs that CAN runs and nonprofits like CAN really need funding right now, especially to bridge the gap between what's lost from federal funding. And I thought it was really notable that his quote, he said, within 5 to 6 weeks, this was obviously a couple weeks ago, we've seen years of damage done. So this administration is really wreaking havoc on the nonprofit sector, and Ann Arbor has not escaped that. So basically, to summarize, the cost of living here is continually increasing, as is food insecurity, and we can expect that again to continue increasing. And then there's been huge cuts in TFAP and EBT, which are federally funded programs that help people purchase food. And in addition, there's also been a lack of funding and a declining supply of food within the nonprofits as well. So Derek was talking about how a lot of the donations they've been receiving are shelf-stable items, but they have an okay supply. What they're really missing out on is the food that people really come for, the high-value food like dairy and meat, products like that are really expensive in store and people really rely on pantries for. And that's what the federal money goes towards, because not a lot of people are donating steak to a food pantry. So basically, there's been more hunger and there's less food. There's obvious consequences in our community, and this issue is extremely urgent because we can expect that funding is going to be continually cut. So obviously the political climate is a bit of an obstacle. Right now there's an over-reliance on citizens and Ann Arborites to donate and support these nonprofits, but we know that donations can't bridge the gap of millions of funding dollars. We also know that donations aren't typically the right type of food, so that also doesn't really fix the problem. There's also been a lot of fear-mongering and real fear in the community about undocumented immigrants and their ability to access food when it is provided. So some research has demonstrated that even when there's food or shelter or aid offered, some populations may be more or less likely to take advantage or opt into those programs just because of visibility and anxiety surrounding that. Also, the recent tariffs are a big obstacle. It's going to pose more cost on households that are already struggling, and a lot of the tariffs are placed on places that we rely on for food and agricultural imports. So this domestic supply strain could also decrease food safety and decrease the amount of regulations on food coming in so that domestic supply can kind of support us more. So where do we go from here? Obviously, we need funding for the nonprofits quickly. We need it to bridge the gap because there's really no other way. And I wanted to spend a little bit of time talking about the work that some of the nonprofits are doing so you can get a better sense of what funding might help and sort of how we can support those places. So there is a ton of food pantries and a lot of programs in Ann Arbor and Washtenaw County that support people. There's a lot of, as I said, pantries, but there's also food trucks, there's meal services, and a lot of these have faced financial struggle recently, so a lot of these would be great candidates for funding. The problem is where to put the resources. So Food Gatherers is one of the main kind of suppliers of food to a lot of these nonprofits, and they themselves do a lot of work. On their website, they also have a ton of resources for people, like recipe cards, distribution flyers, and they're just a really well-oiled machine in terms of getting volunteers and how they use their money, and sort of their programs are clearly thought out, clearly like transparent on the website, and just a really good organization overall. They also have something really cool called their garden, which is on Duverin. And their garden, they can have volunteers there that kind of help grow the food, and they do use the food to go to some of the pantries, but there is, they also help people learn the gardening skills and kind of apply it to their own gardens. They have a really cool program of like teaching gardening, and it kind of made me wonder how feasible this whole gardening idea was, especially in Michigan, knowing like it's only gardening season a couple months of the year. I'm not really sure how effective this could be. So I looked into it a little bit, and I was kind of inspired by the Victory Gardens that I remember learning about in like elementary school. So it turns out that back in the day, Victory Gardens actually produced 8 million tons of food, and I had no idea that they supported the food industry, I guess, during the World Wars that heavily. So using that knowledge, I kind of looked into what the research says more broadly about gardening. And I found this study. It's a little dated. It's from 2009, but it is small. But it had 42 families, and the average size of their garden seemed very approachable to me, 11 by 12 feet. And when they surveyed the families, they found that adult and child vegetable intake was really heavily increased after implementing the garden and teaching them how to. They also reported less worry and less anxiety, and they said that it helped the health of their family. So I got really curious about how gardening can provide more than just food, so I looked a little bit more into it. And a lot of research actually has been done on how gardens support well-being in general. So they're community building, they're restorative, they can be cross-cultural, personalizable, and empowering to people, as well as enhance well-being, increase social capital, improve life satisfaction, and provide better quality food to people. So this whole mechanism of using gardening to kind of bridge some of the food insecurity seems really feasible, and there are some people already doing that, like Growing Hope, which is based in Ipsy. They have a lot of programs, some volunteer, some sort of mentorship. Actually, the team leadership program, teens can get paid. I think it's $13 or $14 an hour for working in the garden. So it's a really cool program that teaches them the skills, empowers them. They also donate to volunteers, and they donate to food shelters, and they have field trips. So this work is already being done in the community, but again, these people need more money. So the interventions that are sort of working within the system we already have, which is kind of propping up the nonprofits financially. We could also encourage non-shelf stable donations, but that's not a sustainable solution. It may help in the meantime, but we need to think more outside the box than that. But Derek really stressed the importance of educating sort of the city overall as to why food is going down in supply and why the funding is being cut. And he really talked about the importance of emphasizing the administration's role in this so that people can really see the direct cause and effect. So that's something our group has talked about wanting to do, whether through like speak outs or flyers. We're not sure what that's going to look like yet, but that does seem like a really key piece of it. And then also advocating to the city council to increase the funding for specific nonprofits like CAN, Growing Hope, and others. But then a more creative intervention that I was sort of brainstorming is how we could get community-based involvement and kind of go back to the gardens that we have here that may be more stagnant or people aren't using. I know there are quite a few in Ann Arbor that are sort of not being used or open. So I think increasing the education on the impact gardening can have seems really important to me, given how little I knew about the effectiveness, as well as the workshops that AADL puts on. I know they've done some on gardening, but I'd want to reach out to them and see their willingness to kind of like increase that or turn it into a series or maybe partner with Growing Hope. So that's something to look into. And then just partnerships overall. There's also Slow Food Huron Valley, which is like another similar to Growing Hope, focused on gardening. So there's a lot of factors for and against. I've mentioned most of them already. Derek also really stressed the burnout that's going on in the nonprofit sector, which is a huge factor against change, just because Derek mentioned finally getting over the COVID hump and finally feeling like they were ready to like get back on their feet, and then the administration coming in has really discouraged a lot of people. So that's definitely not something to be underplayed. It's also hard. The gardening solution is hard because that requires long-term maintenance, and while people in the community are doing that, it feels difficult to really support that in the full need. And then also the loss of food and funding has been really dramatic and really sudden. So this is where Ann Arbor could really step in financially and kind of support them in the meantime while we can focus on increasing food supply more holistically and more long-term. I also, after all of that difficult information, I did want to highlight that a lot of people online are doing a lot for sort of just normal, everyday people to figure out how to best use their money. So it's been really cool to see, at least all over my social media and a lot of my friends, how creative people are getting in terms of sharing information on how to budget and how to make use of a lot of the shelf-stable food that is available at pantries. So these accounts are definitely something that I want to try to push out more or make more awareness about, just because I know that this kind of content can be extremely helpful to people, and I know a lot of people use apps like TikTok or Instagram for recipes. So what better way to kind of learn about ways they can use their shelf-stable food than through social media like this. Plus, I thought it was cool. So I guess the next kind of questions and steps for us are trying to get funding, and then also talking to people in the community. I heard a quote recently that was "nothing about us without us," and I really want to implement that idea into this project by talking to community members. And we've been in contact with a couple of the nonprofits and a couple of the volunteer organizers who are willing to go speak to people about their experience, maybe create some kind of qualitative analysis very casually. But I'm also interested in how much local funding will help and where it needs to go exactly. That's something that kind of intimidates me, like where does the check get written to and how does that work? So it's definitely going to take more learning on my part in terms of where exactly the money can be used the most. But I'm also curious about community willingness to explore other options like gardening for food sourcing in the long term. That is it. Thank you. Yes.
I do. Sorry, yes, I have a question.
Yeah.
I'm really also passionate about food insecurity. I actually worked at Hope Clinic for several years.
Yeah.
And they they partnered with farmers in the kind of it's almost, I don't know what county that would be, kind of Washtenaw County, but far out, to provide some of the fresh produce.
Yeah.
They also, it's very important, right, to have kind of an overall health mindset when you think about your food intake, right? But also, it is very interesting because there's such a stigma around food banks still, even to this day.
Yeah.
And so I think that folks who are not coming into the food banks, we're not kind of getting that research, and they might be folks who need it the most. So I think also considering how, when you think about children who are in an increase, what are they doing? So we always saw an increase during the summertime, right, of kids are out of school, and they also have need that their parents are at work, and kind of, how are they getting food that way? But also considering Hope does a nightly meal at 5 p.m. So hot, fresh cooked meal that day. They can come and get. I know that there was some frustration during the winter, in particular during the warming centers. That like warming centers were open. You had to get in line at a certain time, and then so you weren't able to make meal. And so it's kind of like choosing to be warm for the night or choosing to eat for the night. And so considering what that could look like too, I think is important when you just kind of think about all of the components of food insecurity, right? But yeah, no, I'm really passionate. I'm also, I'm a big proponent for Hope. I'm like, push that out, but it's so far away, right? So you have to consider how are people getting there for a nightly meal, and what does that resource look like? It's in Ypsi off of Harriet, and so just thinking about how people are getting there and knowing about it. So
yeah, definitely. Yeah, great points. I also know that a lot of times at Hope they'll have food that isn't getting taken. Like they'll have kind of like leftover produce that no one ever comes and picks up. So I feel like there's a lot to be done there too in terms of like where that food can actually go immediately, or making it more accessible. I know at Hope you have to make an appointment to shop at
and you only get it once a month to shop in the food pantry, and you get 6 bags. And if you think about, if you have a family of 5, that goes very, very quickly. So considering they also try to give you like a hot or a bagged lunch as well to try to get you to the next meal the next day, which is something that I think is pretty cool. But again, seeing significant decrease in funding, federal funding, but also just from, they get a lot of it from food gatherers, but I can't think of the other. USDA, I'm pretty sure, also provides a lot of resources for them as well, but just considering the cuts that are happening everywhere, that are being impacted so negatively in the community. But I think it would be also interesting if you consider like farmers markets and talking to the farmers of like, you for sure more than likely have an abundance of produce because produce is going so quickly, right? Because it's only good for a certain amount until it turns into compost and all that. So I wonder how to partner that way too.
Yeah, that's a really good point. And I know Growing Hope kind of sells at the farmers market, so I'm sure they have some connections there. That would be a great avenue to explore. Thank you.
Any other questions?
Yeah.
So you mentioned in the flyer local resources.
Yeah.
Are these the only ones, or are there others?
No, there's a lot more than that. I think the flyer hasn't been updated, but we didn't send the updated copies. So I can send that via like email, but yeah, there's a lot more resources.
I ask because Catholic Social Services publishes a listing annually of all resources that are
amazing.
and they have just for food 11 different entities that provide that. I wondered also if you have partnerships with the grocery stores and the restaurants.
Yeah.
There's I'm not sure of its exact title, but for food that is prepared that is not sold, if someone were to become ill with eating it, there's like a Good Samaritan law where they can't sue them because of that. But I just wondered if you had access to the Catholic Social Services. It's actually called Senior Resource Guide, but it is not exclusive to seniors.
Okay.
So anyone can. The Salvation Army, for example, is on there. There's a pantry in Milan. Packard Health Clinic has a pantry where you can pick up food 3 times a week. Same thing with Salvation Army, both the Ann Arbor and the Ypsilanti places. And then you mentioned, Rebecca, the USDA. Our church, my church, serves meals second Sunday at Hope Clinic. But during either pre or post pandemic, the USDA was partnering with entities to distribute food, and our church did that. I think for a 3-month time frame, like every Sunday. And we would post things around our church and put it on our Facebook pages. And we had people literally coming from all over the state of Michigan just to get those foods. So I just wondered how vast was your area where you serve or partner with entities to provide the foods. And then there are some churches that are partnering not only for homeless housing persons. The church across the parking lot from my church house homeless Saturday and Sunday night, 7 p.m. to 7 a.m. I think St. Luke's offers food in Ann Arbor. You know, for the shelter, where they can leave the shelter and go and get a meal. There's just a plethora of all of these entities that I just wondered if there was any collaboration amongst all of them. So that either their people are not double dipping. Or because they will do that.
No pun intended.
But those who are truly needy are being served. We get a lot. My church gets a lot of people who I worship on Saturday, and so people know to come to us, but we're kind of savvy about why'd you wait till Saturday? What'd you do between now and then? And for a hot minute, I worked for HAWK, which at that time was under Salvation Army, Housing Access for Washtenaw County. And the county has a position that if you slept anywhere other than your car, you're not homeless.
As the federal government has.
So we have people who come, and occasionally we serve meals, and so thankfully our church is across the street from Second Baptist that will house people on the weekends. But we had a couple come who alleged they were homeless. And we have a person who's a caseworker who has done this kind of work, different entity. Based on their comments, she knew instantly that they were not what they were saying. So we invited them to come in. That day we happened to be serving a meal and said, you're welcome to stay and have a meal. And when the sun sets, you can go across the street and sleep. Right? And we know that there are people who abuse the system, but I just wondered, you know, one about your knowledge of the various places that offer the food, any collaboration, and then what, if anything, you're doing in partnership with hotels, restaurants, grocery stores.
That's a really great question. And I think your point about like just sort of how difficult it is to see what's out there holistically is a really good one. Like ideally there would be some sort of like website that has all the resources, because there's so many independent organizations and they have connections between them, but it's almost like we need some kind of calendar of like places with bus routes, with what foods. Like there's really no way for someone to access all the options, even like with the internet. So then it's like people who are, you know, struggling to access the internet also are struggling to access the food, and it's like, and the housing, and it's just such a, such an issue that requires a lot of intervention. But in terms of resources, we mostly talked to can and food gatherers, and they're really well connected in the community, but I don't know much about like Milan or other farther areas, but it'd be interesting to sort of try to map that out. And was there another part to your question?
Not so much that. We every third Sunday give away toiletries because you can't purchase toiletries with your bridge card.
Yeah.
So what we do is we give that resource guide in the bag of toiletries. They get $10 worth of toiletries, and they have to present the bridge card. We've had some present bridge cards with no names on them, so of course we're like, no. And it has to be local because we're not trying to. There's no way we're trying to serve all of Michigan, let alone the borough.
Yeah.
But what we do is we take that flyer, that senior resource guide, and put it in the bag. And that way they know what's happening in the county.
Yeah.
So that's an alternative to what you... There are some who will never be tech savvy. They're not going to touch an internet.
Yeah.
So the hard copy is the best way to communicate the same information.
Yeah, I'm wondering how a hard question can be.
Can I just respond real quick on the food map? I just want everyone to know, foodgatherers.org has
Yeah,
a
has the
special
food map.
Oh, amazing.
Yeah. And it goes even, as far as like Manchester City.
Oh, awesome.
They got a church out there that's giving away, obviously Chelsea City. And so it is the whole county and the dates.
That's amazing.
Yeah, just want people to know.
And do you know if that's printed anywhere or dispersed in any way other than online?
Usually, I don't know. But usually this stuff is sometimes at the libraries. But I'm not
I think it can change so often too, so I think that
They can't
can be
have it
troubling
static.
as well. So
Like weekly, or you're saying like daily it can change?
It could, I mean,
It
a
depends.
lot of things change because places run out. Or
Yeah.
Hi.
Brandon.
Even though it's fabulous to be able to grow,
Yeah.
I'm sort of curious as to whether, say I rent an apartment, can I raise a chicken?
Yeah.
Like, do we have zoning regulations that in fact...
You can own a,
No, but hang on. The question is,
You can own 5
some of our zoning regulations actually
Prohibit.
create food deserts
Yeah.
without, because we don't
100% true.
monitor,
100%
right?
true. Yeah.
I mean, it's not just, I don't have room to grow.
Right.
Am I allowed to even use the land I have to grow,
Yeah.
right? And how do we...
That's a good point. So I think, okay, nobody go out and do this, but I think it's like 3 to 5 chickens. I can't remember. There's a number.
But even if I'm in an apartment?
Even,
do the apartment
But that's my question is, like, if I am
Maybe
food
you're
insecure,
Yeah.
I probably don't own a house
That's
with land. I mean, let's face it, it's
it is
an
interesting.
economic reality.
There's actually a few, like even like there's a McKinley property. Like I just happen to know because, anyway, on personal reasons. But there's like a community farm, like kind of as part of that private property. So actually, some of these multifamily places do have a few little plots where people can grow. But the broader question you're saying of like, are there regulations that are preventing people from, doing these community farms, having, I guess, small livestock? There is a bill in the state house that's essentially like chickens everywhere because of the eggs. I think it's Republican. It's actually Republicans sponsored it. So, and I think they might. I think Democrats are on it too. But that's a bill to watch. I mean, I don't get to hear anything. It's essentially.
Zoning controls a lot of land use.
It's true. It's true. No,
Right? It's a
100%,
local issue, and I just wonder. How is there a way, just like we've got this map, is there a way that we could review?
Well, that's what we're doing right
We
now.
should talk about that. We'll talk about that there.
Yeah, with the
Council.
comprehensive land use plan.
We'll talk
I
about
think that, what is integrated into there is this idea of 15-minute communities. So communities that are within 15 minutes of walking and just whatever, you can get something to eat, you can see your doctor. So, but what that requires is changing a lot of current zoning, which prohibits increased density or commercial areas in proximity to single-family residential areas. So by allowing grocery stores to be closer to neighborhoods, I mean that too can help to address it.
There's also, we got rid of a lot of the rules. Like, it doesn't matter what your homeowners association says or whatever. In Ann Arbor, you do not have to have a lawn. There's certain things about vegetation height
Like if
that
I could
will allow. So it's there are things we've gotten rid of already that really allow you to do. I think they allow you to grow most everything. Now, I'm not sure.
I started with chickens because we've got protein.
Chicken,
right? And it's something that a child. It's something that a child could do.
Yeah.
Right?
Yeah. So
I wonder, to your point though, because I live in an apartment in Ann Arbor, and there's regulations on what animals I can have through my
Chickens.
chickens.
It's under HOA, and those have like ultimate.
Right.
Well, yeah, I mean, it depends, but I know, anyway. But
So I can have snakes,
it was through council that we did the chicken.
I mean, we even have rodents, which hamsters are included. So thinking about some of those, like, okay, well now am I in Ann Arbor might say yes, but am I in violation of my lease? I don't know.
I don't know. I mean, it's interesting. It might be something we could survey.
Let's finish with your question.
Yeah, so just had like 2 questions. One was just around with the CAN director that you were speaking with. You mentioned that there were lessons from COVID, so I was hoping that you could share some of those of just there's burnout and issues related to that. So I'm seeing that kind of happen now as well too. So if there's anything that we can, I guess, gain from that, so we don't just rubber band back. Hopefully this isn't a long-term situation that we're in, but yeah, if there's anything that we can do to be more proactive or to think about alternative models moving forward. And the other question, it might be outside of the scope of this, but I was curious if you had any insights that came up related to like labor relations or violations as well too, in terms of who's actually doing the work to get the food to the store to the people as well too. I know like that's a huge thing, especially with like everything happening with immigration and hurting people that are doing that type of labor as well too.
Yeah, that is a really great question. I know that a lot of that work, to my knowledge, is done by volunteers, especially places like Hope Clinic, even CAN. A lot of their transportation of food and loading the truck and unloading and stocking the shelves, a lot of that is volunteer, most of it. So in terms of like labor and violation labor, like this kind of speaks to how it's an obstacle that there's such a reliance on volunteer labor, and there's such an onus on citizens to like step up and kind of like help bridge this gap. But yeah, that'd be interesting to look into how much volunteer labor is going into it, and also when there are roles that people are doing to help with the food, like transport and organization, sort of like how many are there and how well is it organized? Because I'm not sure about that. In terms of the COVID lessons, talking to Derek was funny. He's feeling a little bit discouraged, obviously, so he didn't have a lot to say in terms of like honestly optimism. I think it seemed like he was also just pretty exhausted and facing like a lot of stress with like interpersonal kind of like political differences that he's seeing in the community and in his family. He just seemed overall pretty pessimistic about kind of where everything is heading and how little people know about the nonprofits that are really buckling under the financial strain from all the funding being cut. But I do think he mentioned the importance of returning to like local funding and kind of like grassroots connecting nonprofits together rather than so much federal funding and grants. But actually he didn't have a ton to say in terms of like how to not rubber band back, and pretty much said that he feels as though we have sort of rubber banded back, and he's known a lot of people who have quit or retired now because they just can't like bear to go through this after just getting out of COVID, unfortunately.
Thank you so much.
Yeah. Thank you.
Just a few comments about this. The food is going to be a big issue. We know that. It's not exactly human rights, but maybe it is.
I'd say
it is.
I
think it is. And with the prices going up, with all kinds of climate change interference with growing, with, water, I think this is going to be bigger and bigger as time goes on, so I was happy to be able to talk about that.
Yeah, absolutely.
I have different reasons, of course, for wanting to talk about unarmed response, which for those of you who don't know, it's something we've been interested in since the Ora Rasa incident and long after that. One of the things the group didn't talk about that I'm going to ask them about is that when I heard the presentation before, you talked a lot about the lack of transparency. And one of the things that we've noticed is that although we were told that we would be part of the consultation of this, and we know things are happening, we know at least that the city administrator has been traveling and looking at some of these unarmed response groups and seeing what we can learn from them. But we don't know anything about any of it. And that is frustrating.
Yes.
Because I think you're right, we need it. I think we've needed it all along, and I'm very concerned that it's taking as long as it has. I also am not sure, however, if any of these 116 groups have, I don't know how much experience they have. When we last looked at them, there were about 4. When we started our interest, there were not that many. There were some small number.
You're talking about, I'm sorry to interrupt you.
Unarmed response.
I think this was back in 2020 when my first class did this project. And Hannah, were you in the unarmed crisis response group?
I was actually.
And it was her group that first presented to HRC and was like, this is an idea that we should have. So you guys are like the continuation.
We were actually
I was thinking.
Yes, we were looking at it before then. Actually, starting with Soul Rasta. Yeah. So that was like 4 or 5 years earlier.
So we're
And Hannah's now a commission member, FYI. So I was like listening, and I looked at you, and I just got a flash of you presenting. And I was like, oh yeah, that's pretty cool.
Actually, in the report we did suggesting the creation of ICPOC.
Yes.
After Ora Rasa was killed, I remember researching what other cities were doing, and we had some stuff on that.
I started looking at that, and we did talk about certainly different kinds of crisis intervention.
Right.
I don't know that the term
it was
unarmed response was there, but I know that we've had resolutions about it, and the resolution that City Council passed, I'm pretty sure, said that they were doing this in consultation with ICPOC and Human Rights Commission, and neither ICPOC nor us have had any interaction at all for years.
Can give you an update. So, the city is still in the information gathering phase. So Milton did go to Durham. He went to Atlanta, and apparently city staff, so I'm looking at an email as of February 25, so this is pretty recent. And also staff visiting Albuquerque and Denver. And I know Denver is one of those programs that has, been added a while, and they have never needed 911 to intervene. I think one of the pieces he spoke about when talking about Atlanta is, you guys had talked about dispatching, and he had said they have social workers like sitting in the dispatch room, like as people are answering their calls, and like literally kind of coaching them through, trying to decide and take over at different points. So that was just something that our administrator was actively observing. We hired, this past year we got about $500,000 from the state, and that was actually Representative Morgan who brought that in. But that's we used that to hire 2 social workers, and they work for Supportive Connections, which is kind of the downtown. I mean, it is localized, but it is the downtown homelessness response. I mean, they even have at City Hall some cards that business owners get, and they can hand out to people who need services. But there's, I think we now have like 3 responding social workers out of the first floor of City Hall. You'll see it as you leave. And then, so I think there's just more information. I think the big issue, or the big updates, will be coming as part of the budget process. I'll say that every year we've been kind of stashing away a little money. So I think every year from our marijuana excise tax revenue, which is somewhere about $2 million, we take about $500,000 to save that for unarmed response. I think we've done that 3 years now in a row. There's also we get the community health, mental health and public safety rebate funds. 40% of that we're also stocking away for mental health, and that's been about, I think, 2 years of that. So I think that comes in somewhere about $3 million. So that money is like just under $1 million. So when you talk about that point of reallocating resources, we're sort of doing it in a little ways under the surface, because the mental health and public safety rebate, that's money that the city sends to the county for dispatch. And almost every other community in the county is basically just saying, hey, thanks for the check, we'll put it back to our police because this is money we had allocated for the police. We send that money to other places, and one of those places is on our response. So there's a little bit under the surface there, but it kind of adds in to somewhere around that $1 million that some of those communities were doing. We're not, still working on that, still banking on it, still banking some of those funds as we get stuff rolling. And this applies actually to both presentations. An issue that the city has, and I would encourage you guys to come to the budget. The budget will be announced, I think, April 21st.
Yeah.
Monday. The presentation's at the start of the meeting. I would really encourage everybody to come. But one of the issues that we've talked about, and I've mentioned in the group, is this idea of one-time versus continuing funding. And even the marijuana money, where we're taking in, I think, somewhere like 2.1 million, it's still considered one-time money, because that market has just been unstable. Some years it's come in at 1.5, some years it come in at 2.1. And so the administration can't really budget off that just yet. We're hoping that stabilizes, but we're seeing different things like consolidation in the industry and everything. But we're hoping that in the next 2-3 years, we can start seeing that as a stable part of the general fund. And once you have a stable part of the general fund, that's when you can hire people. You can't really hire people off one-time money. Same thing when it comes to supporting nonprofits, when it comes to supporting food. Like if we give CAN, a one-time check, they're not going to be able to go out and feel the security to hire somebody. So we're working on ways of creating these secure income streams. And I think with the food issue too, because some of their funding they're losing is from the USDA, and some of that is like a one-time expenditure of buying a set amount of food. I think there's opportunity there. So. Yeah, just wanted to mention a few of those.
I want to say something about that,
Sure.
though.
Sure.
You're talking about money, and I appreciate that this is expensive.
Yeah.
But we have not talked about it with people to think about what we really want. And without having that process, first of all, we can't put in place things that don't cost money, that are just changes in the way we do things. And there are some things about unarmed response that we might be able to do without any money, just having to do with maybe maybe a little training, but maybe not that much. And also, when you've talked about it and you know exactly what you want, and I think the community has to be involved, not just somebody going around.
We did really have to go back to ground zero. Go ahead.
I've got to speak to this
Yeah,
because
sure.
I don't think you meant to say, and I really want you to focus and clarify.
Sure.
I don't think you meant to say that the city of Ann Arbor is sitting on $100,000 or more a year and not distributing that to poor and hungry people so that we can stabilize our revenue.
No.
And you didn't mean to say
Well,
that,
no,
right? No, please just say yes or no. Did you really mean that?
What I'm saying is we are setting aside money to set up a program. It takes all of these cities, you can look at it. It takes $4 million, $10 million. It takes money to start a program. So taking it, and yes, I think of our marijuana money, we're sending like $1.75 million out the door. So we're sending $1.75 million out the door, $500,000 each year we have kept back. First we use some of it, we've used in different ways, but basically we're banking that to set up a program. But it's a percent. I mean, that's like a whatever you want to say, 15% or
I mean, really, we are not feeding people because we are banking.
So every budget season we'll allocate money to give to like youth prevention services, to homeless prevention, to mental health, to organizations that are doing food distribution. It has never been like the question or the proposal has never come to us that people are hungry, we need to give out money for food. And we're like, no, we have to create a stable revenue stream. This year, for example, I want to make sure that we bring forward budget amendments where we respond to the emergency crisis, right? Like there has to be some rapid response.
And we did set aside money for that.
And
we have $1 million we set aside for that.
I think that what you're specifically talking about is that there has been long-term conversations about like let's make a program that is ongoing and it's affiliated with unarmed crisis response, and we have discussed that like we need to make sure that we don't just hire people and fire people in a year.
And I can understand that within the framework of an unarmed response program.
Right.
But Chris, you also added on feeding people. You said this issue and the food insecurity issue. And I just wanted to say,
I was
let's
saying,
not lay
so a
people
lot
with
of
that
the food,
impression.
the food, what I was saying about the food, the reason it applies to food is because a lot of the issues that CAN is dealing with is staffing. And so we need a way, you know.
Not only that.
No, it's not only that, but I was mentioning it as an application. But I think the bigger issue is, getting funds out the door for food. We can do that right away. And I think,
Can we really do that right away?
Yeah, I mean,
okay,
we can talk. We can in consultation with the body. But yes, we can do that. I mean, we have $1 million. I wanted to speak. I mean, this is my council communication, so you're not going to hear any more from me. But it's $1 million. 10. We want to be able to use 10% of up to 10% of the funds for each of our goals in terms of this Trump effect funds. And so that means about $100,000 per organization, per cause we'll have to think about. So just to set expectations around what we can do. That's what
I just want to be really clear. I don't know how many people in this room have ever actually been hungry.
Yeah, sure.
Right? Because if you have, hearing that is about the most appalling, least compassionate, least democratic statement ever. There is never a reason, there is never a good enough reason to leave someone hungry. Never. Not budgeting, not staffing, not planning, no reason. And
I agree.
Right? And if we can push money out right away, like you said, then that's exactly what we should be doing. I'm just standing up for everybody who is hungry right now.
I appreciate that. I mean, I've served at the St. Andrew's breakfast program. I've sat there and I've tried to do my part on my own.
I am not saying that you don't, but it's not being talked about in this way.
I was speaking about it in the context of, I just wanted people to understand that it's one time and this is the conversation. I'm giving you the exact conversation that I've had with the administrator on any of these issues when it comes to social services. There's just, and maybe it's a little too academic the way I'm talking about it, but it is the question of one-time versus recurring funds. I think it applies to every social service thing we do. In terms of getting out the door for money for food, I mean, we're working on it. It's a priority for us, and we do have one-time funds to put toward. I don't want to overpromise, but we do have one-time funds. I think we can get to it. So we'll get to that. And
that's fabulous.
No problem. And I mean. Yeah, anyway, we have county partners too. I mean, OCED is right. I'm putting it here because she works out.
And everyone listening, there is nothing more important.
Yeah.
No, absolutely.
Sure.
No, I absolutely agree. And like my priority this budget season is trying to respond to these, all these crises, right?
Right.
And food, and I think it was misspoken because that wasn't the
I think
part of
And then I wanted to go back and say, okay, we can't just let that stand because that's not.
I don't think
that's not.
One thing I'll just say, just to interject, is I also think that we have to realize that when it comes to the crises that we're experiencing now, they're not going to be short term, most likely. They're going to be long term. So that's why I think part of it is having some of that, I guess in a way, safety net, because yes, we might be able to get them to the next day, but they're going to come back. And they're going to need more funding, they're going to need more food as well too. So there's a both and situation that needs to happen of, yes, we need to get them to tomorrow, but we also need to get them to next week as well too.
And in my perspective,
it
I want to
needs
just
to be a
say my
long-term
perspective,
plan.
that to me that doesn't mean that it doesn't validate giving them money today, right? Just because they're going to come back hungry tomorrow, that doesn't mean we shouldn't give them money today. That is my perspective. I'm speaking on behalf of myself as a council member. I do also think that in order for it to be sustainable, we need to start creating an infrastructure of support. For example, with the county, all of us need to get together who have money and who oversee people's lives, and we all need to pitch in and say, how do we create a sustainable system that keeps people alive right now?
Yeah, so that both and.
Because I agree. There is no hunger. I mean, we can't just put stuff in reserve.
Right. Yeah.
I understand. We need more. We need more resources. We need more in order to address the more need that we're producing every day.
Most of us, fortunately, is not our problem right now, and I want to go back to our business meeting, which I think we've got a half hour to deal with.
Yeah.
But I think this was important, and I'm glad we did it, and thank you very, very much for coming in and talking to us. Clearly.
Yeah, you guys are great.
You did a very good
I
job.
can't imagine. This is like, how many commissioners do we have in the wings?
That's right.
That's right.
Yeah, good topics.
Okay.
Important topics.
I'm going to go back to my, I'm just
You should feel free to leave if you want. This will be the last.
And thank you very, very much for coming.
Thank you for having us.
You're welcome.
You can stay if you want.
Oh, yes, you're welcome.
You're
to
welcome.
stay.
You're very welcome to stay.
That's why I got up.
To kick them out. I want them to feel that.
Pam, to your point really quickly about Hope Clinic, they actually do partner. And again, I'm only speaking towards Hope Clinic because, and do you know Marvin?
Of course I know Marvin.
Anyway, but they partner with like Trader Joe's, Kroger, Meijer, and then local bakeries around to provide the access of what they can't sell that's going to go quickly. So they are kind of in that. The infrastructure is not there for that in other spaces too. So.
Yeah, and in the Sunday that we serve, sometimes it's very little, like they run out.
Yep.
When, I don't know if it was, I think it was pre-pandemic, when the USDA was giving away the meat, and our church signed up, and we were just, the U Second Baptist parking lot, we just had people lined up, all arteries leading there. And any extra, we took over the whole clinic. And it wasn't just meat, it was gallons and gallons of milk and all kinds of other dairy products.
Which is their hot commodities.
Yeah.
Let me bring you back.
Yeah.
Thank you.
So just a follow-up to that, and just so that it's on record, it's good to, I'm not opposed to assisting individuals. We may in fact be in that position ourselves going forward at some point. But I heard a presentation that it's, and I think Habitat for Humanity uses this slogan, it's not a handout, it's a hand up, where you are teaching people, you're not feeding them for one day, you're teaching them to fish so that they can sustain or help themselves. So I don't hear it implied or intended, but I'm not hearing that that's part of that conversation, where in supplying that need, it's not just here. It's teaching individuals to be self-sustaining themselves. And everybody, our church, I'm telling you, I think it's because we worship on Saturday and people know that. They deliberately wait. They don't know that we have resources in the community to check their stuff, if you will, to see if they're truly, legitimately in need. But we have a lot of them that come, and we know and we can check that they are like making the rounds. So as part of the conversation about collaborating with all of these resources so that you have all persons who may come, who may legitimately be in need, you're not just giving it to them, because that's cyclical. I found when I worked for Hawk, the same people would come every year who needed help for eviction prevention, or they needed rental assistance to move in. They got money, but they spent it unwisely. So not wanting to duplicate that and truly wanting to meet the need, I think the best way is to teach people to be self-sufficient.
We've got to go and talk about some of the internal business. So, approval of March minutes, first of all.
I move that we, second.
All in favor?
Aye.
Opposed? Minutes are approved. City council, I'll wait for that.
Pardon me, could we also do an approval of the agenda?
Oh, thank you. We actually didn't do approval of the agenda.
I move that it be approved, but that we reorder it, get rid of 4 and put 2, and then also get rid of strategic plan quarterly goal check.
We're not doing that either. You're right.
That shouldn't be on here.
No.
Okay. Second, anybody?
Second.
All in favor?
Aye.
Good. Passed.
I was just here.
Um,
I'm here. Were you calling on me? For?
And yes, anything that we should definitely know about
I mean,
City Council.
communities are in crisis, and nonprofit sector's in crisis. The budget is coming up, so we're talking about these issues, and all of us. Chris has also talked about these issues with me around food insecurity, and we're thinking about what can we do, and also like where is our power to leverage county, right? And
where is our what?
Our power to also leverage our county partners, because we have to remember
Yes.
that using Ann Arbor taxpayer dollars then is only going to certain people, right? And this problem is widespread across the county and across geographic lines. So those are some of the things that are on the horizon.
I want to encourage every single person in this room, tell all your friends, anyone who lives, works, worships in Ann Arbor. We're doing the comprehensive land use plan right now. If you search Engage A2 and then comprehensive plan, or just Ann Arbor comprehensive plan on Google, that'll get you there. Right now, there's a draft plan up there. It's 144 pages. Wow. I think I've gotten a look at it. I think it's pretty good. There's a great history in it. I hope that you give your comment. There are sessions at the library. There's sessions at all the library branches starting like April 24th on the northeast side. I know it's May 7th at Traverwood. But yeah, everything, all the opportunities to engage, all the opportunities to submit comment on land use, which is a human right. I mean, housing is a human right. All these things are human rights. So please consider engaging on the comprehensive land use plan.
Is this, is this what the city sent to the consultant, or what the consultant sent back to the
coming
city?
back now. This is the full word. Yeah, this came back as of yesterday, actually.
Oh, okay.
So I actually just was able to leaf through it at lunch, but it's 144 pages, and I hope you guys dig in and line by line comments. And always you can email planning@a2gov.org with comments. On a personal note relating to council, I just wanted to say, I don't know. I lost a good friend on Monday. Deshaun Leith, he was a community leader, and that's why I'll bring it up in this session. He was a community leader for My Brother's Keeper, Underdog Nation, a bunch of youth nonprofits, and he passed away. So it's been a tough week. So thank you.
Just really quickly going off that he was on the advisory board for the Packer Black Men and Boys Mental Health Ambassador Program, so that's something that I'm working on right now. So if that provides any type of, peace, or just knowing that his work and insight is being continued on, I hope that gives a little bit of joy for you as well, too.
Mm-hmm. Thank you. At the last meeting, we talked about business cards. And if you remember, we asked Keita because she was had such strong opinions about it, if you had any ideas, and if you wanted, it looks like you have a possible mission statement or a statement. We talked about a statement about what we do, who we are.
So I think defending human rights close to home is pulled from a statement that Eleanor Roosevelt, delivered when she was asked the 10-year anniversary. So I don't know if people know that after World War II, there was convening to basically develop the slate of human rights that really are the foundation of human rights internationally. And when people asked her what are the origins of human rights, she said, it's at home that they begin. And if concerted citizens and residents don't defend them close to home, we'll look in vain for them in the broader world. And I really felt that, for me, it has been the cornerstone of why local work is important, why local volunteering is important, why all of these kinds of meetings are at the heart of what we stand for, because we look at sort of where we are nationally and internationally now, and we can make a stand still here at home for our neighbors And I'd really sort of like to look at a broader mission statement than something that's just pulled from the City of Ann Arbor website. So that's sort of what I was going for.
So you're thinking that this might go on the underside of the business card?
That defending human rights, this is would be the front of the card.
Sure, it feels good. I don't know.
If I could, if I had greater control over the program I was using, I would want the City of Ann Arbor above defending human rights close to home, but for some reason it just kept bopping it off the page. But I'd want that change, and if we could do the City of Ann Arbor defending human rights close to home, then we could take out the human rights in front of Commissioner where the line is, where we're all going to write our names. Because I thought we were still doing a universal card that everyone could use, right? Okay, so.
That's a good idea, a good way of doing it. I like that.
I have a question. I'm sorry, I have a question. Are we somehow also able to put, like, either on the back how to submit a complaint?
Yep.
I think that would be helpful, whether it's a direct link or I'm hesitant with QR codes just because not everyone has use of smartphones, so I'm kind of hesitant with that. But just in terms of like how to submit a complaint, I think would be helpful.
I do, and I think all those instructions would be great with the QR code.
If people,
I think, it's all on our website, so that needs to be front and center somewhere, because it's all there. So with the QR code plus the website, I would like a little time to think about this and reply. My concern always is that so many things get defined as human rights, and we're limited in the sense that our job is to enforce 2 ordinances and also advise on human rights issues affecting the city generally. But we're also, we get so many complaints where people think we can help them when we can't. We can generally refer them. So I just want to be a little careful about what we promise we can do. So, we can think about it.
But that's why I wanted to put the City of Ann Arbor on top of defending human rights, close, like to ground it in the city and not just close. And in terms of addressing the specifics, I did think if we talked about the specifics, when we talk about what we can defend on the back, we can do a more detailed sort of highlight of what those rights really look like in Ann Arbor.
I don't know how much you can fit on a card, but
well, I know.
Ideally something.
Like the ordinance.
I don't know how much control we have over our website, but I think it would be worth saying just like putting a QR code to our website with a website link, and then we could have a page on the website that really lays out like what the commission can do for you.
It's all there now.
Oh, okay.
It's all there.
Well, you know what I found?
I feel like the website is a little bit like it's not like
it's hard to find
like
things.
here.
We're limited because the city has its way that everybody has to do things.
But the Housing Commission's is broader.
It's broader?
Yeah, it is.
ICPOC is broader too.
Broader how?
Just their presentation is broader. And also I cribbed this from them. Their, the left hand, they actually have it so that the City of Ann Arbor, Michigan is, we have their logo. And then they've got the Housing Commission, and then a broader circle around that, so it really looks like, you've got the Ann Arbor City, and then you've got a Housing Commission, and when you go to their page, it talks in general about who's on the commission, broader housing-related needs, like, the City of Ann Arbor sort of embraces housing as a human, it's...
Well, anybody should feel free to suggest changes to our website. I'm the one who sort of, got it going from nothing, but just to put whatever information was there, and we keep tweaking it over the years. Mostly we keep adding things as our responsibilities have grown and our power has grown. We have to share that on there. But any suggestions are welcome.
Well, and maybe we could sort of talk about a broader template for all the commissions. Right, I mean, let's follow, right, the Housing Commission, because the Disability Commission, I mean, we have a lot of these sort of volunteer residents groups. And even having a standard, card template would be nice.
Yeah, that would.
I mean, it doesn't even have to be this one, but even, does City Council have?
I'll show you my card. So I'll show you my card. It's pretty simple. It's got a value statement on the back. I can read it out. The City of Ann Arbor's mission is to deliver exceptional services that sustain and enhance a vibrant, safe, and diverse community. And then it's just got my contact info on the front and the City Hall address. I was actually thinking, acknowledging not everybody has a smartphone, but there is room up in the upper corner for and this is my just campaign card, but there's room if we wanted to do a small QR code that took us to the site, and maybe that could clarify some of the stuff you guys are able to do, just sending us right to that site, for someone with access to a phone, get you right to the site. I don't know, that's maybe something to think about in that I think there's room in that upper corner.
So I'll send it. That was the one thing I told Leslie, that the program I was using, it's bad.
Yeah. Okay.
So what I send won't be.
And the city to make it however you want.
Okay.
But we've got it closer. We're getting closer, I think. Does everybody like this?
I want to think about the words.
Okay.
The mission statement is something we would have to.
This isn't really a mission. This is kind of a tagline.
And I'm not, suggesting the adoption.
I think it's nice to have something just like the city does.
Well, that's a good start. I like the idea of having a line that says Human Rights Commissioner, so that you can, when you put your name on it, it doesn't look quite as iffy.
Quickly, I don't want to beat this to death, but in my job, I manage the whole website for my county department. So this is something that I work on all the time.
Right.
And so I'm curious, because number one, when you click on filing complaints with HRC, the link's broken. It doesn't work.
Okay, well that's
a human rights issue.
You should just just email Kennedy.
Okay, and then also I'm curious, do you know if the Ann Arbor website has short links for their pages? Could we make a link that's a2gov.org/HRC?
We have that.
We have that.
It's human rights.
Oh, human rights.
Yeah.
Okay. Good to know. Thank you.
Yeah.
No, thank goodness.
But no, seriously, I haven't looked at it in a while, and it is true that they sometimes, for instance, they recently edited one of the complaint forms, so maybe the link didn't sync up. I didn't go back to check. Hannah, if this is something you want to work on, just whatever feedback you have.
No volunteer for the job.
And especially as a newer commissioner, you can sort of look at it with new eyes. I'm sort of I don't even see it anymore, because
it's hard to, everyone wants to change something,
and we wanted to make it sexier, but we were told we couldn't.
Oh, I understand.
So,
because we'd probably have to relay everything to someone else who would then do the work, and that is hard.
Yeah. I don't know. I just feel like the times require something.
Oh, 100%. Even to consider, when I wanted to apply to become a commissioner, right? That was very difficult to find. And so I only had help because I knew someone on city council who was able to kind of, here's the link, right, kind of thing. So it was hard to find, but it's also just the update of things, and I think that you did a really good job. There's just so much information on there, so it's kind of hard to sift through, and I think that people now are TDLR, or TL, what is that? Too long, didn't read. So I think that thinking about that mindset as well, I think just sifting through that all information, because I don't want to read a whole paragraph or 3 paragraphs of what kinds of things I can submit a complaint for, right? I want bold right there, seeing if, yes, this is something that the Human Rights Commission can think about investigating or whatever that looks like. So I think that there's definitely work that can be done for sure.
Please. Good. Next thing.
I was just going to say, so you
can modify the content on the site. So yeah, if there's certain things you want changed. And then I did too want to mention the city recently switched our service provider for the website. So that may speak to the broken link. But yeah, I would advise just emailing Kennedy, letting her know that it's broken.
Perfect. I will.
Thanks. On Friday, at 1 o'clock, we have an appointment with the Chief of Police, Chief Anderson, and we've got possibility of including 2 more people. Right now, it's me and Keita.
And me.
What did I say, me and Keita? Yes. You, not Keita.
No, not me.
But who wants to do it? Who else wants to do it?
Because I'm in Chicago.
Then you're
on
not
Friday.
doing it. Is there anybody else who wants to come? Great. Rebecca.
1 o'clock.
Now I have to tell you that they often have to cancel last minute, but I'm glad, but I wrote to them.
I'm off on Friday, so.
Okay. No one else? Okay. Anything else before we adjourn?
Just one comment. I finally got in touch with, thank you, Linda, with the representative with CTN. So we're going to start slow and transition to maybe more. But Linda helped me find the poster. It doesn't, our flyer that goes to all of Person's contractors, potential contractors who want to do business with the city, and they have to prominently display that. I emailed that to her name is Dana Denha, and she's going to then put that on as a PSA that will scroll on the bottom of the CTN channels. And so it'll point, it's more of an FYI, did you know? And then they're going to see that flyer. It doesn't have on there, because we checked today, the right to see.
Excuse me for interrupting. That's the flyer that we were just handing out to people in public, not the contractor.
Right.
It's not. Oh,
right.
Okay.
Right.
Okay,
But
good.
it's something. So from last month to now, we're finally going to be on CTN. That's really what
Okay, so check it out. Thank
That's
you.
fabulous. Thank
Now,
you.
she said to just email it to her, and we didn't have to physically come. But I discussed 2 things. One is like the quick and, 30-second, it'll scroll and everybody will see HCR. But we want to ultimately transition where we have an interview, a sit down where we're either all of us or just some of us sharing with the community who we are, what we do, and how we can help. And so I'm going to see how the initial foray into advertising on CTN works, and then, not that we're, looking for work, because we have plenty, but I just want us to get the word out, as I shared with her, and also Melissa Bonde, who was the initial contact. We are the best kept secret in Ann Arbor, and so we want to change that.
Yes.
So I'll look forward to the rest of the week.
Thank you
have
for
something
doing
by
that.
Friday. But we've been trying to do that for a couple of years, and so we're finally out there. And hopefully,
Thank you for taking action. Okay. Can we have a...
I'll move to adjourn.
Second.
All in favor?
Aye.
Adjourn, but don't leave yet.
Okay.
Thanks, everybody.